Today's guest is Andrew Sherman. Andrew is a champion of entrepreneurship. He's a senior partner at Seyfarth Law Firm in DC, teaches at the University of Maryland and Georgetown Law. He is the general counsel for the EO, which is the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's an international organization and has written about 27 books on entrepreneurship, including The Crisis of Disengagement. And I want to note that that was written in 2017. The only blemish I see on Andrew's resume is that he's friends with Brian Moran. Besides that, he seems like a heck of a guy. Andrew, welcome to the Rebound Live webcast.
It's great to be here with you. And I'm just going to embrace the Brian friendship because it's exposed now and I've got no other choice.
You got to own it. You got to own it for sure. You wrote this book, The Crisis of Disengagement, in 2017, 5 years ago. Why?
Well, I'm going to lay out what I'll call the triangle. And the missing point in the triangle was this book. I had written a book a few years before that called Essays on Governance. And that was about governance and leadership and culture. And then I wrote a book around harvesting innovation on how companies could better monetize their assets. And I really thought I was done. And I would go into these companies and talk about the need to monetize their tangible and intangible assets. And what I began to realize is that they did not have a culture of engagement. In fact, they had a culture of disengagement. And the disengagement was getting in the way of teamwork and collaboration and inclusion and many, many, many other things that we'll talk about over the next 3 to 4 hours together. The first book I ever wrote that I was not a subject matter expert in any way, shape, or form, but literally a concerned citizen. So that book, The Crisis of Disengagement, finished out the triangle, if you will, of what a company needed to do to really maximize its growth. What I didn't see coming was COVID-19, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, people were pretty disengaged pre-COVID, and then, oh my gosh.
Tell me, repeat the triangle that you mentioned.
So you've got leadership and governance at the top of the triangle. I mean, if leadership and governance is not committed to a culture of engagement, a culture of collaboration, it will never happen. I mean, we all know that people do what they're instructed and rewarded to do for the most part. And if they believe that the board of directors and the C-suite doesn't believe in these principles, then they're not likely to believe. The Harvesting Intangible Asset book was a book about building, the metaphor was to agriculture, building agricultural-like systems for the harvesting of innovation inside a company. But that third bite of the triangle, if you will, was recognizing that if people as individuals and as working teams were not engaged in their work, the other two books would essentially collect dust on the shelf.
Yeah, now powerful stuff. How did you see this coming 5 years ago?
Well, I certainly can't take credit for seeing the impact of COVID, though I have lots of thoughts on it. What I saw 5, 6 years ago, I'm a voracious reader of business research. I absorb it like a sponge. I wake up in the morning to CNBC and Bloomberg. I go to bed at night, and I stumbled on this Gallup study. The Gallup study literally blew me out of my chair. I'm sure, Matt, in preparation for your webcast, in the work you do with your clients, every once in a while, something lands on your desk and you're just like, OMG, I can't believe that this is true. And the Gallup study basically said that you had a good 2/3 of America were either somewhat disengaged or actively disengaged.
Wow.
And I want to dwell on that just for a second, if it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to be somewhat disengaged. You know, now there's a new term for it, the quiet quitters. You know, they're always coming up with new terms. You know, somewhat disengaged is you're coming in, you're doing basically what you're paid to do, but you're certainly not going the extra mile. But actively disengaged, which was 20% of the Gallup study, Actively disengaged is Dave waking up in the morning and hating where he works and trying to recruit Stephanie and Teresa and others into the hater club. So he's now not only himself actively disengaged, but he's trying to get others to join the club. And I don't mean to pick on Dave. It's just, that's who's on the top of my Zoom screen. So there we go. But the point being, that's really damaging. Now, here's the equally disturbing part. The rest of the third is either somewhat engaged, which means, every once in a while, they score a 3-point bucket, but not very often, or they're superstars. Do you know how much of our workforce is actively engaged? 4%.
Wow.
4%. I mean, how do we stay competitive as a country? How do we continue to grow? How do we train and mentor our young people if only 4% are coming in every day filled with piss and vinegar, ready to take on the world and most importantly, go the extra mile? And as a coach, how far is your team going to make it in the standings or to the playoffs if only 4% of your players come in every day and give you all that they've got at practice?
They won't be in practice very long.
Precisely.
And
you may not be a coach very long.
No. Well, hence why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yeah.
All right. That's called zinger number one.
Yeah.
Who's keeping track of the number of zingers, right?
We're
up to one zinger. It's only 807.
Very subtle, Andrew. Yes. Okay. Lower Marion High School outside of Philadelphia.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, listen,
May
let's
Kobe
not
rest in peace.
In personal warfare. We can do that later. Two questions come to mind. One, how do you measure it? We're all into metrics, right? And how do you measure disengagement? Because it's kind of a little arbitrary. It's kind of like, how do you measure it? And then how do we change it?
Excellent question. Number one, I've always believed that numbers follow, they don't lead. Okay. So behaviors cause metrics to happen or not happen. And you don't have to agree with me. There's probably some financially trained and CPA trained people that would disagree. But in my mind, you have to get the behaviors right and the metrics will follow. So all of the important metrics, from profitability to innovation to revenue growth, to efficiency, to teamwork, to collaboration, all of those are the outputs of engagement. If I come in every day and not only do I want to do a better job, that I want to go the extra mile, I want to, really take it to the next level, but more importantly, I want to interact with you. And you, by the way, could be somebody with a very different background than myself, a very different skin color than myself, or religious background, but I want to engage with you out of a genuine interest. There's even a DEI dividend to engagement, because when people are genuinely interested in each other and genuinely interested in doing a good job, they see past whatever differences are and focus on commonalities. So that's one way to measure it, is by looking at traditional business metrics and understanding that if your metrics are down, there's a damn good chance that your engagement is down.
You touched on DE&I. We had a speaker on this webcast a few months ago discussing that topic, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Exactly.
Not equality and inclusion.
Yes.
And so anybody who's interested in that could go back and on the website and look up that webcast, because it is recorded. Okay, you got the measurement. You see that this is happening. The $900 trillion question. How do we address it? For all the people on this webcast, 32 people, by the way, which is a good number. We still, Stephanie gets a bonus if we get to 50. She didn't know that, but she gets a bonus.
Well, there's the thousands of people that are going to be watching the archive version. I mean, that's the way it is these days.
That's right. That's right. And we'll get this out, SEO, the whole deal. How do we change it? Andrew? How do we change the engagement? Because, a lot of people, especially, 60 and older, 50 and older, look at the millennials, look at the younger generations, don't see engagement. They don't strive for the same things that we strove for, and that may be a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. How do we change engagement?
Well, let me come back to the solution in just 1 minute. I do want to clarify one point you made as a fellow boomer, right? Because I think we discovered in preparing that we're about the same age. This is not a crisis of disengagement just for millennials. My kids are 32 and 30. They're both super engaged in their jobs, and many of their friends are engaged in their jobs. There's a lot of disengaged baby boomers. There's a lot of disengaged baby boomers who at this point in their lives are just giving up. And we'll talk about the impact that COVID's had on that in a few minutes. So I don't want anybody thinking that it's just a particular group. Another thing about the Gallup study is it's not just a particular industry. People say, oh, I went into a retail store, I had a terrible experience, but tech workers, they're highly engaged. No, all industries, all age groups, all ethnic backgrounds, there is a crisis of disengagement that cuts across all relevant demographics. Now, on to the solution. It begins with leadership. It begins with leadership recognizing that they have a problem. I'll go into companies to talk about engagement, and many times leadership is either number one, in complete denial, number two, so caught up in their old ways that they just can't change, or number three, is somehow overconfident that they've solved the problem. You know why? Because we recently took an engagement survey and everybody said they were engaged. Yeah, and if you believe that, I've got some swampland in Florida to sell you too. I mean, companies will get caught up. I mean, the way to figure out whether your employees are engaged is not to run a survey where everybody's going to fill out the survey answering the question exactly as they think you want it to be answered. You will see engagement. You can feel engagement. Pre-COVID, you could go into a company and I could tell you in 5 minutes, just by sitting in the lobby. And I used to do this a lot. I would come to meetings early. Try this sometime once we're all back to work, if we're ever all back to work in a normal setting. But come into a company, spend 15 minutes, get there early. It's also the right thing to do as opposed to getting there late. But just listen, watch. How do people talk to each other? How do people treat each other? Are they treating each other with respect, real respect, genuine respect, not that kind of surface level stuff? I'm talking about really interested in helping one another. Something's missing from the conference room. How quickly does it arrive? Why does it arrive? Do people say thank you to each other? Do people use basic words like please? As if I was in a meeting the other day and there was no coffee and somebody picked up the phone and, called office services and started yelling. And I said, I don't even want the coffee now. I don't want coffee brought by a disengaged employee who just got disrespected and mistreated by their superior, whatever that even means. And so we've got to be more realistic about what engagement really means and the behaviors. It's a lot like parenting or coaching. Yes. People are watching your every move. They're watching how you interact with others, how you treat others. And that's a part of it. A second part of the solution is real rewards and incentives. One of the things that comes out in some other research I did is that as much as people are motivated by money, many of us, particularly now, post-COVID, money is like number 3 or 4 on the list compared to feeling like they're part of something, empathy, feeling like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And this, I'm sure, was part of your coaching when it came to teamwork. I mean, if I'm a rock star basketball player and I can play for anybody and I'm going to thrive with anybody, then what does it come down to now? The intangibles, right? Will I get along with the coach? Does the coach motivate players? Will I get along with my other players? I mean, that's going to ultimately determine performance on the court, and it's going to determine performance in companies. I think if you really got somebody, maybe 1 to 2, Brian, good whiskeys into a conversation, they will tell you that money is 3rd or 4th and maybe even 5th on their list of priorities. People want peer recognition. You know, they want to be recognized for their work. When I was a little kid, you'll appreciate this, Matt. When I was a little kid, I read this story in Philadelphia Magazine that the most boring job in the entire world was to work at a toll booth. And it made sense, right? I mean, how much does the toll booth worker have to tell his family when he gets home at the end of the day? Hey, honey, how was your day? Yeah, you know, I made a lot of change. One guy came in with 100. It was unbelievable. I somehow had enough change to change the 100. You know, I started engaging in conversation with toll booth operators. I couldn't even drive yet, just to make them feel. I'd do something funny, like give an extra $1 for the car behind me so that he had a story to tell. People want stories to share with their family. Not every job is interesting and exciting, but we can still treat people with enough dignity and respect that they've got a story to tell. And an extra 10 cents an hour was not going to change that toll booth operator's life, but giving them a story, making them feel good, telling them, you know, some funny joke real quick, even though it holds up the line and everybody honks their horn at you because they got to get into New Jersey across the Tacony-Palmyra Bridge. It's okay. You know, this is just a micro example of attitudinally things you can do to increase your engagement. And here's the other thing. Being nice to people costs you nothing. Being nice to people costs you nothing. This is not some expensive consulting survey that you've got to get done to have a more engaged culture. All right, I'm going to stop now, take a cup of coffee, and give you a chance to.
Yeah, no, Stephanie, I hope you're writing. There's a lot of nuggets. I hope you're writing. Being nice to someone costs you nothing. And I have a hard time, though, giving that credit to a guy from Philadelphia. Okay.
Yeah, I know. I understand that.
Look, they throw snowballs at Santa Claus at football games. So, you know, what do you really? I mean, you must anyway. You said there were a couple
of great comments are coming through. Let me just highlight two of them. Jeff says authenticity is essential, and Jeff's right. You know, one thing about engagement and leadership and the way that people will perceive things, if something's not authentic, it will backfire. You will make your engagement worse if you're not genuine. And everyone now has their spidey senses fine-tuned enough that they know when you're being genuine and when you're not. So kudos there. Second thing, and this is a Moran thing. I'm sorry, Matt, but we're calling him out a second time. You know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's a famous quote, and it could not be more true. Strategy technically will never be implemented properly without culture. And you can't have culture without engagement. And that's why the Gallup study blew me out of my chair, because if culture is the beginning of everything and everybody is this disengaged, like, how do we move forward?
Well, I talk a lot about culture. The triangle I talk about is talent, systems, culture. And you've got to have good systems and you've got to have good culture. You can control those things. And the better your talent, your systems and culture, the better your talent will perform, the better you'll attract talent, and the better you'll retain good talent. Big part of my culture, and you mentioned it, Andrew, is showing up on time or early. And Brian Moran is officially blocked today because he showed up after the 8 o'clock start. So I'm just telling you, a guy from Chaminade, Rockville Center, New York, showed up late.
I think Brian tried to get in at 7. It wasn't ready yet, and then he got caught up probably in something. I mean, Brian, I got your back on this, bub.
Yeah. If you have
Matthew.
No. No, I'm not going to let you hijack us. No. You got to raise your hand.
I did. Hand it up. Both of them.
Emoji hand.
I don't know from emojis. I sell technology. I don't know how to use it.
Mute him, Steph.
I'll mute myself. Stop. Be nice.
I feel bad. He's got a Yankees jersey in the back. I feel bad for the guy. Come on, let him talk.
He's from the South Shore. Okay, Conk, go ahead. You got Conk. You got 1 minute.
So, Brian, my son went to Chaminade, and they still had the rule instituted. If the bus was late, the whole bunch of you on the bus how to stay for detention. Is that archaic or what? Because they figured somebody on the bus did something wrong and made the bus driver late. Sorry. Hey, it takes a lot of energy to be nasty. Nice accounts for a lot in this world. If you have values and grandparents and parents that teach you from the beginning how to be a good human being, that accounts for a lot. And listen, anybody who says, oh, I wasn't taught that way is just taking the lazy way out. It takes too much energy to be nasty. It's so easy to be nice. You know, I love everybody, even if they're jackasses. It doesn't matter to me because I don't let them rent space in my head for free. Thank you, Matt.
Well, one other.
That was awesome delivery. All right. I love the fact that you stayed within the 1 minute. That's why I got McAllister on hold right now. He's on ice because he's another Long Island guy, Sherman. I'm sorry. We got a lot of Long Islanders here. And Chuck.
It's right. We've opened up the door to use the word jackass on the air. So this is good.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. This is not family hour. You said there were three things, three keys: leadership, rewards, incentives. You didn't say the third. What was the third one?
Empathy.
Empathy.
Genuine empathy. I mean, you know, I wrote a book. I read a book years ago that really did change my life. I know people say that, but it did, called The Celestine Prophecy. And there were a bunch of principles in the Celestine Prophecy that Redfield writes about. And one of them is the importance of empathy. But empathy doesn't have to be just because it's the right thing to do. Empathy can be selfish. You know, what if I meet Stephanie on the train, and if I just sit there like this and don't pay attention to her and don't talk to her, you know, or not show any interest in her situation, what Redfield writes is I might be losing out on an opportunity to myself learn and grow. Stephanie might have something to tell me. There's a reason she's sitting next to me on the train. And if I don't engage in conversation with her in a genuine way, I've lost out on my own opportunity to learn and grow. There's probably a message she has for me. And we've lost that. And we'll talk hopefully about the impact of COVID in a minute, but we've lost that in a big way. And not just in terms of business growth and productivity, but we've lost a little bit of that in our communities and in our response to violence and our response to natural disasters. Compare Katrina to Ian. I mean, yes, you saw lots of CNN shots of people helping each other, but 10 years ago, it just felt like we were that much more interested in empathy than we are today. And we've got to turn that around.
You touched on, I think, first of all, Conk touched on family. I think that this has to start in the home. And I don't know the numbers, but I got to believe that there's less true family units. There's less, dads in the homes, and there's probably less spirituality. The discipline. I grew up Irish Catholic. I don't go to Catholic church anymore, but there was a discipline in that. So the family unit, it does start at an early age, so how do you combat that, which you talk about a big issue? And then you talk a lot about the engagement and coming back to work, but if we're not coming back to work, if people are working through Zoom, how do you improve engagement in that manner?
So let's drill into COVID for a couple of minutes, because we need to understand what's really happening and unpeel the onion even further. Not only has COVID impacted workspace and workplace and how we work and where we work and when we work, but it's also impacted our own visions of our own self-satisfaction. And so what happens is when people around you, family members, friends, neighbors, coworkers are dying, I mean, literally dying from a global pandemic, we went through this YOLO period. You only live once. And the YOLO period forced everyone to ask themselves, am I happy in my life? Am I happy in my job? Am I happy on the career path I'm on? And particularly boomers who said, hey, COVID or no COVID, I may only have 10 more years or 15 more years or 20 more years on this planet. how do I want to spend those years? And so if you were disengaged, my premise is that COVID became an exasperation of that disengagement. That's before we even get to your question about how do we improve engagement in a disconnected, everyone working from home in their underwear. I know you're not wearing pants, Matt. You don't have to stand up, but we know. And I don't blame you.
I'm going to lower my stand up.
No. Stop. This webcast has been canceled for rated R. Yeah, exactly. Brian, hide your eyes.
We're okay here. We're okay. Yeah, you got me on a good day.
All right. Just checking. Notice when a basketball player raises their screen, it takes about a foot longer, right? Did everybody notice how much longer that took? YOLO was good in terms of self-actualization. It wasn't so good in terms of the impact on engagement, because, if Brian was marginally engaged and then YOLO and COVID hits, he's probably fallen now into the actively disengaged, because it exasperated the realization of how unhappy some of us were. And then we got nasty about it and started blaming, like we all do, everyone except ourselves for the career path that we're unhappy on. So that's a very big philosophical impact that COVID's had. Now we go back to Matt's important question. If, and I underline the word if, but if the future of work is from our home offices and, coffee cafes and other things like that, and we're only going to be together on a limited basis, number one, we have to make the most of those moments together. And it can't just be, putting out breakfast where everyone runs into the breakfast room, grabs their breakfast sandwich and goes back to their desk. Like, that didn't accomplish anything. It has to be moments of real collaboration and meaningful exchange, because we may only have one day a week when everybody's in the office, or almost everybody's in the office. We have to look for those as real teaching and coaching and mentoring opportunities. And point two, and this is harder, we're going to have to learn to coach and mentor and reward and peer recognition on Zoom. I mean, if Brian made a really good comment in the box, which he did, about culture eating strategy for breakfast, I can't let that go. I have to call it out. I have to give Brian the quick smile and recognition that he made a great comment in the chat box. And I can't tell you how many Zoom calls I'm on where nobody's even looking at the chat box. I mean, people enter into the chat box to engage in conversation, right?
That is a skill. Leadership is a skill, Andrew. And I, as an executive coach, I compare leadership to golf. And, you can't just take a lesson and expect to play at Augusta and win. You have to practice. You got to prepare. And one of the challenges as a leader in running this webcast is the chat. Because if I'm reading the chat, then I am not engaged and listening to your comments, and you may say something that deserves a response. And if you feel that I was disengaged by reading the chat, then I've lost that emotional connection. So I need to maybe assign that to Stephanie and say, Stephanie, you read the chat. If somebody says something really good, you need to interrupt and give them credit.
Matt, that was the most insightful thing you've said this morning, because isn't that what great leaders do? They know what to delegate and what not to delegate. They know what impact certain behaviors will have on engagement and what behaviors will have on disengagement. That's exactly right. This little Zoom exercise is a microcosm of larger leadership. And how do I manage my chat box, if you will? It's a great metaphor. It's sort of developing in my head as I go. Brian knows, and we do this all the time. It's a great metaphor for leadership, because the chat box, there's a lot of cool things happening in that chat box. And if I'm not going to be able to manage it, or if I'm going to imply disengagement to my guests, I need someone to help me manage that chat box. And I'll tell you this, you cannot accomplish engagement these days without having a fantastic lieutenant, and a fantastic lieutenant that is being groomed to be you. Just like in your world or prior world, your assistant coaches. I mean, I'm sure you relied on a lot in successful seasons, and the credit goes to your assistant coaches. Yes, you chose them. Yes, you coordinated them, but it was those lieutenants that really made things go. And I don't think you can have engagement these days, particularly in this fragmented workforce that we're in, without great lieutenants.
Yeah, well, I'm blessed with Stephanie. I don't think she wants to grow up and be like me. It would be awkward, but you know, a lot more interesting things are happening in this world.
She's tried to grow the beard, won't happen. Just wasn't work.
Yeah.
She tried.
A couple things. I did take a peek and I saw David Force, and then we'll get to Chuck, and then we'll get to Brian. David Force worked at SeaWorld and was all about behaviors. And so I know he put something in the chat. David, in a minute or less, can you explain what you put in the chat and kind of play off of Andrew and his comments about rewarding good behavior? Because I know you're all about behavior.
I did. You know, my tagline for my company is it's all about behavior. And, you know, everything he was talking about hinges on our behavior. And whenever I do my management seminars, I keep talking about the only thing that you control is your own behavior. You influence others' behaviors. So if I want to alter your behavior, I've got to modify my own, and that influences your behavior. And if we just focus on our behavior, things will alter and change to the better. The one thing I put on there, and I made note of it, just a caveat, that rewards and reinforcements are not equivalent. They're synonyms in a crossword puzzle, but they're not truly in the workforce. A reward is something given as a tangible item in recognition for a behavior that's emitted. You did a good job, I give you a pat on the back, I give you a piece of chocolate. Okay, that piece of chocolate is a reward. A reinforcer increases the likelihood of you repeating that behavior again. But if you are allergic to chocolate, then I just about killed you. So it's not a reinforcer. It's still a reward, but I define that because I like chocolate. And so I'm giving you a piece of chocolate. So we need to be careful as managers that just because I like something doesn't presume that the staff does. In fact, I despise butterscotch, but I used to keep butterscotch in my pocket because some of my people enjoyed it. When I took a piece of butterscotch out of my pocket and gave it to them, that did two things. It acted as a reinforcer because I know they enjoyed the butterscotch, but also they realized I was thinking about them because I wouldn't be having butterscotch for myself. That conveys the fact that I'm thinking about you. I believe in you. I believe in your success, and I want to acknowledge that. So it serves two purposes. So be careful that you don't assimilate rewards and reinforcers. That's all I'm articulating.
Matt, may I react to Dave?
Of course.
So two things, Dave, you said a lot of things that I strongly agree with, but two things that you said I want to emphasize. Number one, your behavior influences others. And this word influence is a critical cornerstone of engagement, right? You know, if I'm working in a company where I respect, I'm watching Dave, I'm watching his behaviors. And if I respect him and I want to be engaged, I'm going to start mimicking those behaviors. And in that regard, you're an influencer of behaviors, no different than the influencers out there trying to sell blue pens on TikTok. Secondly, rewards and incentives, I absolutely agree, are two separate paths and need to be looked at separately by leadership. The mistake that most leaders make is picking the incentives that make sense to them. Right. Okay, so back to his butterscotch example, I was working with a company that had no charitable activities whatsoever. And so I said to the CEO, you know, young people, to be engaged, they want to see that the company has core values, that it stands for something. And he said, you know what, you're right. We're going to, you know, my aunt died of breast cancer. We're going to be all about breast cancer. We're going to support breast cancer. We're going to do a walkathon. We're going to, and I said, you're not getting it. I'm very sorry for your aunt. Breast cancer is obviously a great cause, but you know, you've got 150 people in the company. Everybody's aunt died of something. And until you build some consensus, it's just like Dave's butterscotch. I mean, he's imposing the support of a particular charity in his solution to try and show that the company was more charity minded. And that really doesn't move the engagement needle, you know, especially if Stephanie's into something much different than that for whatever her reasons, be they environmental, health, social justice. You know, you're going to have to go deeper than just picking the thing that affected your family, even if that thing is itself legitimate. Right. I mean, Dave, you know, nothing wrong with butterscotch. It's okay if you don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of like butterscotch. I need to hang out with Dave.
He's got plenty in his pocket.
We're getting ready to go into it. It could be be careful. Strap on your seatbelts here. We got back-to-back Long Islanders. We got Conk, we got Chuck, and then we got Brian. So I've got my finger over the mute button, Chuck. Go, you got a minute. Chuck McAllister. Oh, unmute. I'm going to unmute Chuck. You're killing me, Smalls.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Good morning. I'm going to get right to it, Matt. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
As a 58-year-old,
look, it's a talking chair.
Yeah, I know. As a 58-year-old on the back end of being a baby boomer, I wake up every morning, even more so now, with piss and vinegar. But one of the things, I have a couple comments, and maybe you can answer them for me. First, on an overall conception, that we as a culture coming out of the pandemic have allowed for disengagement. There are so many aspects of our everyday life that allow us to just sort of put a wall up between us and communicating with people, which is frustrating for me. And even more on a micro level, from a corporate standpoint, I find that corporations have set up so many walls in so many ways for people not to even get through to engage. You know, myself being this independent sales guy who aligns myself with different causes and different projects. You know, I go out and I try to engage, you know, I'm a top-down type of sales guy. I try to engage those individuals that I believe can be decision makers and hopefully get to the solution or some type of conversation sooner than later now. But I am finding as a society, as a business society, that 4% doesn't surprise me, by the way. I think that's high. I will tell you, maybe I'm doing things wrong, but my engagement to get through to people and to be able to start a conversation genuinely because I believe there's synergies or there's opportunity for me to help, and that's a genuine thought process. Yeah, we all want to be successful, but I mean, I love the catch and being able to get it across the finish line, as much as, like you said, money at the end will come if you do the right thing. And I just want your thoughts on that. Do you see, and can we come back from it? I don't know that we can come back from how we've set all these standards for disengagement.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I think that's a good point. Basically, I'm thinking that the question is, how do you penetrate that veil that is between now you and your customer base? They don't know you. How do you penetrate that through Zoom, and there's less engagement on people? There's more gatekeepers, and not just people, it's technology.
Well, let me address Chuck's question, but before so, Chuck, what are you driving? Everyone wants to know what car we're looking into with the red leather.
It's a Yugo.
Okay. All right, Yugo. Yeah. That's a collector's item, man.
Yeah, baby.
So, look, let's go back to the Gallup study for a minute. The 4%, you're probably right. I mean, I don't know if 4% is high, but it's certainly low, right? We all agree that's not enough. Low single digits is not enough in terms of people that are highly engaged and the rock stars inside your company. Probably getting that number to 5% or 6% would move the GDP, significantly if we could figure it out. Where we need to focus is what I call the soft middle, right? The number, it's almost like you're a teacher in school. your A students are probably going to maintain their status without a lot of motivation or tutoring or mentoring, if they're naturally A students and they're going to work hard no matter what. And to Matt's point and other people's point, their family is supporting good study habits and other things. It's the B and C students. The B and C students, some of those B students are capable of being A students. Some of those B students, if they're left unattended, disengaged, will drop quickly to C and failing grades. And so I think we're going to get the most out of the middle and trying to incrementally improve that number, so that maybe if we could move from, instead of 18 or 20% somewhat engaged, up to 30 or 40% somewhat engaged, believe me, you will see, if you believe in numbers follow, they don't lead, you will see real impact on revenue growth, customer service ratings. I mean, remember, when Matt asked about metrics, it's not just financial metrics. Think about, whether you go back to a restaurant or not, assuming the restaurant's reopened, around the level of service that you get and the intangibles, and, oh, the music was playing, that was the song, reminds me of when we were dating, and, things like that bring you back to a place, bring you back to an experience. Customer experiences, which every, business magazine I read, is the number one thing that we're looking for post-COVID. And the number one reason we make consumer decisions are driven by engagement. There's no way to have a great restaurant or retail or travel experience if the staff is disengaged. It's impossible.
We're getting, we've got 18 minutes left, and you were talking about C students. Well, I got a C student for you here. Brian Moran, what have you got?
Brian, I don't know if you take this, but I'd stay on mute, actually. Just stay on mute, because that's the safer bet. No, you're really on mute. I'm not kidding.
All right, how's that now? Better?
There we go.
All right. No, this is like dog meat fire hydrant. I'd be a C student in Chaminade. I'd be an A student in Trinity. So, and Matt,
I knew that was coming.
But you'd be an F at Lower Merion.
Oh, please. That's in a league of its own. There are so many great pings here, Andrew, with your comments. You and I talked about that Gallup study, and I remember, I think it was in 2018, 2019, when they actually said that a full third of the people that they surveyed were either actively engaged or engaged. And that was the highest number it had ever been in the 20 or so years that they had done the Gallup poll. And I remember saying to you, what a crime that is, that they're touting that 1 in every 3 employees is either engaged or actively engaged, which means that 2/3 of your people would rather be doing something else. So this is a conversation that you can't,
especially in a post-YOLO world, right? Because the something else isn't just going to a competitor. Something else might be something completely different.
So this is a conversation, though, that I think it's almost, this could be like a cottage industry, right? Where you, and really what we're talking about historically is company culture, right? This is it's the company culture of engagement versus disengagement. But the point that I want to, or the question that I want to ask is, you talk about that soft middle, changing the approach to work in a soft middle. Is that DNA or is that learned behavior? Because you can see the changes in the mindsets of people just in the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, that was a team they were going to be the number 1 wild card this year. And something happened at the end of the season where they were losing almost every single game, and they were a game away from not even making the playoffs. Like, something happened, right? And if they had lost one more game, the Milwaukee Brewers would be in and they would be out. And suddenly they're in the World Series and they're tied coming back to Philadelphia. And the way they're winning these games are, I mean, you're getting the superstars who are getting some hits, but it's the 7, 8, 9 hitters, right? That's what you see happening. How a number 6 team seed is competing with a number 1 team. So how do you get the ordinary to do the extraordinary?
So a couple things. One, my proof for numbers follow, they don't lead, is did anybody see when they were in game one, when they were down 5-0, Verlander has a stat that his record when up 5-0 was something like 163-2. Yeah. He's only lost 2 games. Now, if you're a mathematician, you're thinking there's no way they're coming back to win this game when Verlander's record is 163-2. Yeah. So you're right. There's a combination of a DNA and a spark. The DNA is the raw talent that's on that team, or they'd be incapable of performing at that level. But the spark, Matt, that's the coaching piece. That's the leadership piece. That's the piece that makes a team believe that they can somehow not only overcome all the challenges throughout the season, but also overcome a 5-0 Verlander, which right. They did. And it was the 7, 8, and 9 hitters. I mean, look, I get excited like all of us do when the 2, 3, 4 comes up to the plate. But games are won and championships are won with the 7, 8, and 9 players. And that is the baseball equivalent, Brian, you're 100% right, of the soft middle inside many corporate cultures. There's one other quick thing before we get to the next speaker, Matt. Sarah just had an amazing comment in the chat box that I just want to call out because it's very important.
I appreciate it. I was going to let her step up next because I did at your prodding, Pete.
Yes, right.
Brian was talking. I knew there wasn't much substance to it, and
so you went elsewhere. Exactly. I checked my email. Right. I looked at websites. I think I bought a used couple of baseball cards. I did the same during Brian's comments. Yeah. I mean, that's the smart thing to do. That's just time management.
That's right.
So Sarah had a very important point.
Sarah Daniels, family friend, my brother, my son and her brother are best buddies. Sarah's a leader in the construction industry, was at Turner Construction, now has moved to the Beck Group. She understands, here's a beautiful young lady in the construction business. So you talk about cultures, and Sarah's impacting culture at the Beck Group. Sarah, if you don't mind.
Can I just make a quick comment on Sarah's chat box and then we'll go live to Sarah?
Yep.
Okay, Sarah, you brought out another part of my Crisis of Engagement, Disengagement book that we haven't talked about yet. The dividends of engagement are not just the productivity and innovation and collaboration and profitability. Studies have shown, including the Gallup study, that a highly engaged workforce also is a safer workforce, has less pilferage, less accidents, less OSHA violations. I want Sarah's point to be brought out that engagement saves lives. It literally saves lives. Can you imagine a disengaged workforce building a tall building in New York? I mean, the number of accidents, workplace incidents, the number of people out sick in critical jobs that decide not to come in. The construction industry is a great example of where engagement literally means, life and death situations. And same with, emergency responders. I mean, even medicine. I don't want to get an operation if I need surgery from a doctor who's disengaged, right? I don't want to go to court with a lawyer who's disengaged. And in the professions, the levels of disengagement are off the charts right now in law and medicine and other very, very critical functions in our society. Sorry, Sarah. I just wanted to call out that point. It's really important.
Speak to us, Sarah. Speak to us. Drop some knowledge.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Mr. Darty, and for your time this morning, Mr. Sherman. But yeah, I think overall, just when we look at building effective teams on construction sites, it's been really interesting, especially during and post-COVID, with how do we make sure everybody on that project site feels that they're contributing on a daily basis? Because if they're not feeling that, they're not showing up to work 100%. And we think of it almost like a draft pick. So internally, how are we assembling the most effective team, right? And then making sure that we set up a basis of satisfaction with our clients and our design partners. And then how do we onboard our trade partners? How do they understand the culture, right? What type of culture from their organizations can we bring into our project site? and have everybody going in the same direction throughout the course of the project. And I think it's one thing to be welcoming on a project site with our trade partners, and it's another thing to go say good morning to everybody and use their name every morning and hit them with a fist bump on the job site. Ask them how their weekend is, how their 10-year-old daughter's birthday party was, right? So you have to practice that emotional empathy on top of the technical acumen, on top of, you know, contract negotiation on a day-to-day basis. So you're constantly jumping from different tasks and different people, and you have people on the job site who haven't barely finished high school, and you have people on the job site who did their PhD for fun, right? You have people on the job site who have their JD and are practicing. So really understanding, I think, in our industry.
So you saw me the other day on the job site then?
What's up? I didn't hear you.
Guys,
Matt
it wasn't worth hearing. Sarah, it was not worth hearing. Go ahead.
But yeah, I know. I think overall, it's a continued challenge and a learning opportunity. Every day you wake up to go to a job site with, how can you make sure everybody feels valued today, right? And how can you make sure that everyone is walking away giving their 100%? Because it's hard to find skilled labor. And, you know, in different regions of the country, it's getting even harder. So yeah, just food for thought.
That was a mic drop right there, Sarah. The thing that really hit me when you talked, Sarah, was you're in the world of construction, mainly guys with hard hats, lunch pails, shot in a beer after work. And you touched on, how do they feel? How do they feel coming to work? Do they feel a part of it? How do they feel? We're talking soft skills. Brian asked, said this is should be a cottage industry. It is. I mean, that's why I do what I do. I mean, I'm all about culture, and some people don't get it. But if you are a part of a team or in the military, you have a head start on understanding what culture's all about. And those little things going around, how's your 10-year-old daughter's birthday party, fist bump, happy anniversary, that takes work. But it's not work if you care. And I'm looking at Brandon Blau. I screw up your last name, Brandon. Sorry. Brandon is an EOS implementer, and one of their key metrics or evaluators is how do you evaluate your talent? And they talk about GWC. Do they get it? They want to have the capacity to do it. And sometimes we elevate somebody to the level of their incompetence. And what Sarah just talked about, it takes capacity to be able to go from, I got to negotiate this job. I've got to hold people accountable. I got to be the tough guy when products doesn't show up, but yet I've got to go up to Joe and ask Joe about his 10-year-old's birthday party. That takes capacity. Not everyone has that bandwidth to do that. Can you stretch it? Can you practice it? Yes. But do they have the care factor? Do they care? I was a scout in the NBA. I talked about care factor. When a player gets $10 million, a guaranteed contract, and they're tired or hurt, ankle, do they care enough to show up? The best ability, Jeff Van Gundy would say this, NBA coach, the best ability is availability. And to get your people engaged, then they will be available to work. We've got 6 minutes, so I'm going to give Terry Lyons a minute and then Adam a minute. Terry, first of all, thank you so much for bringing Bob Delaney on last month. We have probably the best back-to-back webcasts we've had. We're on a roll thanks to people like you and Brian Moran for helping me bring in great guests like Andrew and Bob. Go ahead, Terry. You got a minute.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. And actually, this is something I learned from helping Bob do that book, and something I wouldn't have necessarily even realized prior to the, say, going back to 2016 or even back to managing a ton of people at the NBA league office. I think what we're missing in this discussion is the fact that our employees or the people we're meeting might be suffering from pretty severe depression. And you can never tell, it's invisible, and you can't intimate on it. You can't guess, you can't touch that discussion out of courtesy. But a disengaged person might just be, going home and totally showing, at all times of their day, showing signs of depression. So it's just sort of food for thought and too big a subject to take on now, but we have to think about it from the other side in terms of management.
But Terry, you're 100% right. I talk about this in the book briefly. I'm not an expert in mental health. I didn't even want to pretend to be, but anxiety, stress, depression, all of these things are relevant. I don't think there's any of us on this call that don't suffer in some way from some level of anxiety, stress. The key is it at a level where we can turn that anxiety or stress into a positive from a negative? And that's as much advice I can give. But I think as leaders, we have to distinguish depression from laziness or disengagement from anxiety. And, these are very fine gray lines. And that is a very important aspect of it.
Good response.
Yeah, and real quick, Matt, I'll just add that it can manifest itself in so many different ways, including utter fatigue from not sleeping.
Yep. Thank you so much, T. Adam, you've got a minute.
I'll take less of the question. It's either for Andrew or possibly Sarah. It's related to mechanisms to drive engagement versus just saying that an engagement is right and good, coming from like the field managers. And so if you haven't read it, long time ago, Jim Collins wrote Good to Great, right? And he talks about mechanisms and things like that. So possibly Sarah, because I'm in the hotel business and we have a hospitality culture, but we also do a lot of construction, right? So when cultures collide, sometimes it is beautiful and great. But I'm very curious about the mechanisms as far as follow-up and quality assurance, if we're saying like engagement assurance. Anybody want to share a mechanism that has worked extremely well for their company to drive it?
Sarah, you got another nugget for us? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add on. I'm a firm believer in the power of a handwritten thank you note. And so taking the extra time anytime I meet someone, anytime someone on our job site does something that I see them go the extra mile, I'll get a handwritten note and I'll pass it around to the job site team and everybody will sign it and say thank you. Or when we're sitting down and appreciate our client doing something, our design team doing something to help the project move forward, little notes here and there. And I think I just grew up and it was always taught, anytime anybody does anything helpful, you sit down with a pen and you write a thank you note. And it's funny, as I've gotten older, seeing that something that I was taught as such a little kid is something that just is almost natural instinct at this point. So I think that's just something that I really like to do is, it's nice to get something in the mail and open it up and feel value from it.
That's awesome.
And it's
great.
permanent.
Thank you.
It's permanent. And your mother, Sarah, and my mother were very similar. I've got handwritten notes in frames on my wall. It's permanent. It's personal. It's not an email. Emails are easy. They all look alike. It's something you keep forever.
And remember the toll booth operator. Give that person something to go home at the end of the day to tell their family about. That's what makes them feel valued, and that's what's going to keep them engaged. Give them a story.
Fernando, you've got 15 seconds. I hate to put you under the gun, but I like to end on time, if not early. That's part of my culture. What do you got?
Participation. I've been in companies that had very engaged people, and it was all about participation, giving people the chance to participate, treating them like grown-ups and allowing them to participate. And that includes recognition, etc. Yeah. But the big stumbling block is that leaders need to be willing to let go of control to give room for others to participate. And I think this is the blind spot that we've been missing for the past 30 years or so, that leaders in general are not willing to let go.
That is awesome. So I'm so glad you raised your hand, Fernando. Thank you. You came in with a great finish. All right, Andrew, we could go on forever. We can't. How do people get a hold of you? How do they buy your book? And do you do public speaking or maybe comedy? Maybe you do comedy on the side. You know, Seinfeld's retired.
Real quick, Amazon author page has all the books. They make great Christmas gifts. Not trying to influence your gift giving. My bio and contact information is on the Sci-Forth website. Definitely do public speaking. Have not yet tried stand-up comedy, but with your support, Matt, a girl can dream.
Hey, this is awesome. And I know an agent. Red is on. She can represent you if you need an agent to get you booked for speaking speaking gigs. Awesome, Andrew. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you for the assist. We look forward to seeing you next month, December 6th at 8 a.m. The guest is retired Army Colonel Rob Campbell, author, executive coach, and keynote speaker. Leadership lessons from the battlefield and the boardroom. Have a great day.
Let's go, Phillies.